April 1st, 1945. 23:47 hours. The island of Okinawa. The darkness here is not just an absence of light, it is a physical weight. It presses against the eyes, suffocating and absolute. To the men of the U.S. 96th Infantry Division, dug into the coral rock and mud of Kakazu Ridge, this darkness is a living thing. It is the domain of the enemy. In a foxhole on the southern perimeter, Private First Class Robert Chun sits motionless. He is sweating, the tropical humidity clinging to his skin like a second uniform. Across his lap lies a weapon that looks like a fever dream of industrial warfare. It is an M3 carbine, but it is unrecognizable. Bolted to its receiver is a massive, telescopic tube. Beneath the barrel hangs a large, bulbous emitter. A thick rubber cable snakes from the weapon over Chun's shoulder to a canvas pack strapped to his back. The standard M2 carbine issued to every other soldier on this ridge weighs 5.2 pounds. Chun's weapon system weighs 28 pounds. The battery pack alone, filled with lead-acid cells identical to a car battery, digs 13 pounds of dead weight into his spine. His platoon mates call it the Buck Rogers gun. They call it the Heavy Beast. Some, whispering in the chow line, call it a suicide kit, a guarantee that you'll be too slow to run when the bonsai charge comes. But Robert Chun isn't listening to the whispers. He is listening to the night. 60 yards away, in a drainage ditch invisible to the naked eye, 3 Japanese soldiers are crawling on their bellies. They are the infiltration units, the Kirikomi-tai. They carry knives, grenades, and satchel charges. Their mission is simple: crawl into the American foxholes, slit throats, and detonate explosives before anyone knows they are there. In the last 72 hours, 23 Americans have died this way on this very ridge. The sentry next to Chun is staring blindly into the blackness, his pupils dilated, seeing nothing but phantoms. He grips his rifle, terrified. Chun reaches down to his battery pack. He flips a toggle switch. The pack vibrates against his back, humming with 4,250 volts of electricity. He raises the heavy carbine to his eye. Suddenly, the world changes. Through the glass of his scope, the pitch-black night is torn away. In its place is a grainy, ghostly green world. The vegetation glows. The rocks stand out in sharp relief. And there, 60 yards out, he sees them. 3 bright, green silhouettes, moving like spirits against the static. They are exposed. They are vulnerable. And they have no idea they are being watched by a man wielding the power of the future. This is not science fiction. This is 1945. This is the dawn of electronic warfare. And one man, armed with a classified weapon and a car battery, is about to change the rules of the night. To understand the burden carried by Robert Chun, we must first understand the hellscape of Okinawa. This was the final battle of the Pacific War, the doorstep to the Japanese mainland. The Americans called it the Typhoon of Steel. The Japanese called it Tetsu no Aim, Rain of Steel. By April 1945, the Japanese Imperial Army had learned a bitter lesson. They could not defeat the Americans in open battle. At Guadalcanal, Saipan, and Iwo Jima, they had seen how American artillery, naval bombardment, and air power annihilated any force that tried to hold a fixed trench line in daylight. So, Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, commanding the 32nd Army on Okinawa, changed the doctrine. He pulled his forces back. He hid them in the honeycomb of limestone caves and ridges that formed the island's spine. And he gave them a new directive: do not fight by day. Bleed them by night. The night belonged to the Empire. As the sun set over the East China Sea, the American advantage evaporated. The Corsair fighters returned to their carriers. The artillery spotters went blind. The battlefield became a terrifying void. This was the time of the infiltrator. Small groups of Japanese soldiers, sometimes 10, sometimes 50, would emerge from the earth like ghosts. They wrapped their boots in cloth to muffle their steps. They blackened their faces. They communicated with cricket clickers or soft whistles. For the American GI, the night was a psychological torture chamber. Every rustle of grass could be the wind, or it could be a grenade. Sleep was impossible. Paranoia was rampant. The standard American countermeasure was the parachute flare. A mortar crew would fire a shell that burst overhead, suspending a magnesium flare under a small parachute. For 25 seconds, it would burn with 200,000 candle power, turning night into a flickering, harsh day. It sounds effective. In practice, it was a double-edged sword. While the flare burned, the Americans could see. But the moment it fizzled out, the contrast was blinding. The retina of the human eye takes up to 30 minutes to fully adapt to darkness. A single flare would destroy that night vision instantly. When the light died, the defenders were left in absolute, pitch-black blindness for 30 to 45 seconds while their eyes struggled to readjust. The Japanese knew this. They timed their movements. They would freeze when the flare popped, blending into the rock. And the second the light died, in that 45-second window of American blindness, they would sprint. They would cover 20-30 yards in the dark, closing the distance while the machine gunners blinked spots from their eyes. In the first 3 days of the Okinawa campaign, the 96th Infantry Division lost 34 men to these tactics. Another 60 were pulled off the line, their nerves shattered, combat ineffective, due to the sheer terror of the invisible enemy. The Americans were bleeding out, cut by 1,000 unseen knives in the dark. They needed a miracle. Or, at the very least, they needed a way to see the invisible. The solution to the Okinawa nightmare had been born in a laboratory in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, thousands of miles away. The concept of infrared light, light that exists just below the red end of the visible spectrum, was not new. Physics dictated that all objects emit some heat, some radiation. But harnessing it for combat was a technological moonshot. Scientists at the Engineer Research and Development Laboratories had been working on a top-secret project since 1943. The goal: create a device that could project a beam of infrared light, invisible to the naked eye, and then use a special scope to convert that reflected energy into a visible image. The result was the Sniperscope T120, later mounted on the M3 carbine. It was a marvel of engineering and a nightmare of logistics. The heart of the system was the image converter tube, a delicate vacuum tube that took the invisible infrared photons and accelerated them against a phosphor screen, creating a green glowing image. But the technology was primitive. To power the infrared spotlight, which was essentially a standard spotlight covered with a filter that blocked all visible light, and the high-voltage converter tube, the weapon required immense power. The engineers didn't have miniature lithium batteries. They had lead and acid. The power source was a wet cell battery, heavy, prone to leaking acid burns onto the operator's back, and finicky in the humid salt air. The weapon itself was ungainly. The M1 carbine, the base rifle, was chosen because it was light, 5 pounds, which helped offset the massive weight of the electronics. But with the scope and light attached, the balance was awful. It was front-heavy, awkward to swing, and fragile. The Army manufactured only about 1,700 of these units during the entire war. They were classified secret. Operators were forbidden from capturing them in photographs. If a soldier was in danger of being captured, his standing order was to smash the scope and burn the electronics with thermite. The technology could not fall into enemy hands. In late March 1945, a shipment of crates marked optical equipment, handle with care, arrived off the coast of Okinawa. Inside were approximately 150 cubic meters carbine systems. The men selected to use them were not chosen for their size or strength, but for their aptitude. They went through a crash course, 3 weeks of intense training. They learned to wire the batteries. They learned to zero a scope that you couldn't see through in daylight. They learned to identify targets in a monochrome green world where depth perception was distorted and shadows looked like solid objects. Robert Chun was one of these men. He qualified on the range near the invasion staging area. He proved he could hit a man-sized target at 70 yards in total darkness. But hitting a paper target is one thing. Hitting a human being who is hunting you, while strapped to 30 pounds of delicate glass and acid, is another. Robert Chun remains, in many ways, a ghost of history. His name appears in no Medal of Honor citations. There are no statues of him in town squares. He was a private first class, a grunt, a cog in the machine. But on the night of April 1st, 1945, Robert Chun was the most technologically advanced soldier on the planet. Imagine the isolation. While the rest of his platoon tried to sleep, huddling in pairs for comfort, Chun was awake. He was the night shift. He sat alone, the heavy battery pack digging into his kidneys. He couldn't smoke, The cherry of a cigarette would give him away. He couldn't talk. He was plugged into the machine. The cable running from his back to his rifle was an umbilical cord. When he flipped the switch, he could hear the high-pitched whine of the voltage stepper, a sound only he could hear, vibrating through his skull. His squad mates looked at him with a mix of awe and skepticism. To them, the M3 was a toy, a gadget that would break the first time it hit the mud. They didn't trust it. They trusted grenades and barbed wire. Chun had to bear the weight of the weapon and the weight of their doubt. He also bore the weight of knowledge. The scope's field of view was tiny, less than 10 degrees. It was like looking at the world through a drinking straw. To scan his sector, he had to move the heavy rifle constantly, panning back and forth, fighting the fatigue in his arms. If he missed a spot, if he was looking left when the enemy came from the right, men would die. At 23:51 hours, 4 days after landing, the test began. Sound travels strangely in the humid air of Okinawa. At 23:51, Chun heard it. A scrape. Fabric on rock. Soft. 60, maybe 70 yards out. To his naked eye, the darkness was absolute. The moon was a sliver, hidden behind heavy clouds. There was nothing there. Chun reached back. Click. The battery engaged. The faint hum began. He lifted the heavy rifle. He pressed his eye to the rubber eyepiece of the scope. Green. A wash of static, like grain on a film reel. He panned slowly to the southeast. The drainage ditch. And there they were. The infrared spotlight, invisible to the human eye, bathed the ditch in light. Through the converter tube, the Japanese soldiers glowed. A bright green silhouette against a dark green background. The lead man was crawling. Chun could see the outline of his helmet, the rifle slung across his back. He could see the man pause, lift his head, and look left and right. The Japanese soldier was looking directly at Chun, but he saw only darkness. He felt safe. He signaled to the men behind him. 2 more shapes appeared. 3 men. Single file. Closing on the platoon's flank. Chun's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The theory was over. He adjusted his grip. The weapon was heavy, pulling down. He braced his elbow on the edge of the foxhole. He centered the black crosshairs on the chest of the lead man. Range. 63 yards. He exhaled. He squeezed the trigger. Crack. The M3 had a conical flash hider, suppressing the burst of light. The sound was sharp, but swallowed by the vegetation. Through the scope, Chun saw the lead man jerk violently and collapse. He didn't scream. He just dropped. The second man froze. He didn't know where the shot came from. He crouched, looking around wildly. Crack. The second man crumpled. The third man, realizing the trap, tried to scramble backward, to roll into the deeper cover of the ditch. Crack. Chun fired a third time. The man fell backward, legs tangled, motionless. 3 shots. 3 kills. 9 seconds. Silence returned to the ridge. Chun kept the scope up, scanning. Nothing moved. The bodies lay there, green lumps in the viewfinder. Down the line, a nervous voice whispered, "Chun? You got something?" "Yeah," Chun whispered back, his voice trembling slightly. 3 of them. In the ditch. They're down. "I didn't see a muzzle flash," the voice said. "I know," Chun replied. Neither did they. The engagement in the drainage ditch was a revelation. But it was just the beginning. Over the next few hours, Chun began to understand the rhythm of the weapon. He learned that the Japanese were confused. At 0:17 hours, voices. Urgent, hushed Japanese. 80 yards south. Chun scanned and found 4 men behind a fallen tree. They were looking at the bodies in the ditch, pointing, arguing. They couldn't understand it. No flares had gone up. No machine gun nests had opened up. Their comrades had simply died. The 4 men split up. They moved west, trying to flank, abandoning the ditch. They thought they were being clever, moving into the tree line where shadows were deepest. But to the infrared eye, shadows don't exist in the same way. The spotlight illuminates everything it touches. Chun tracked them. He waited. He let them feel secure in the tall grass. When they were 55 yards out, he fired again. 2 more kills. But then, a problem. The image in his scope began to dim. The green glow faded to a murky gray. The battery. The instructors had warned him, 20 to 30 minutes of continuous use. He had been scanning for nearly half an hour. Chun dropped into the bottom of the foxhole. In total darkness, guided only by touch, he had to perform a battery swap. He unclipped the heavy pack, the lead-acid cells hot to the touch. He pulled a fresh one from his rucksack. He fumbled with the connectors, thick, rubberized plugs that had to be aligned perfectly. 15 seconds. That's how long he was blind. 15 seconds where he was vulnerable. He snapped the connection. He strapped the new 13-pound weight to his back. He popped back up. Click. The hum returned. The green world flickered back to life. He was back in the fight. The weapon was powerful, but it wasn't magic. It had limits. And on April 5th, nature tested them. A heavy, rolling fog came in off the Pacific. It blanketed Kakazu Ridge in a soup so thick you couldn't see your boots. To the naked eye, visibility was 0. Chun activated his scope. The infrared light could penetrate the mist better than visible light. The wavelength was longer, scattering less, but it wasn't perfect. The image in his scope was grainy, washed out, like looking through dirty water. His effective range dropped from 70 yards to 35. At 2:41, the shapes appeared. Not 2 or 3. A skirmish line. 10 men, maybe more. They were moving boldly, upright, confident that the fog hid them from the Americans. They were right on top of him. Chun fired. He dropped the nearest man. But the others didn't freeze this time. They charged. They saw the muzzle flash through the fog and rushed it. They were 25 yards away. Too close for precision. Chun flipped the selector switch on the side of the receiver. Full auto. The M3 carbine had a cyclic rate of 750 rounds per minute. Chun pulled the trigger and held it. The weapon bucked against his shoulder, spewing brass. He swept the green beam across the advancing line, spraying bullets. The magazine emptied in less than 2 seconds. Click. He dropped the mag, slammed in a fresh 30-round banana clip, and fired again. The sudden, violent volume of fire at close range broke the charge. The Japanese, disoriented and taking hits from an enemy they couldn't pinpoint in the fog, scattered. They retreated into the mist. Chun sat panting, the smell of burnt gunpowder sharp in his nose. He scanned the gray static of the fog. 2 shapes were crawling away. He let them go. He had used 29 rounds and half a battery in a minute. He was alive, but he realized how fragile his advantage was. The technology bought him distance. When distance vanished, it was just a brawl. The Japanese were tenacious. They were smart. They realized something was hunting them. They didn't know what it was. They called it electronic eyes or magic fire. But they figured out how to fight it. April 7th. 1:56 hours. Chun was scanning his sector. Suddenly, his scope went blinding white. He cried out, tearing his eye away from the rubber cup. It was like looking into the sun. He looked with his naked eye. 60 yards out, a powerful flashlight beam was sweeping the American lines. The Japanese had realized that whatever optical system the Americans were using, it amplified light. So, they decided to overload it. They were using high-powered lights to blind the night vision operators. Chun was effectively blind. His scope was washed out, useless. But the Japanese had made a fatal miscalculation. By turning on a light in a dark war zone, they had done the one thing you never do. They had marked their position. Chun didn't need the scope. He could see the beam. He shut down the electronics. He reached to his belt and pulled a fragmentation grenade. He pulled the pin, let the spoon fly, counted 2 seconds, and threw. The grenade arced through the dark, guided by the beam of light. Crump. The light went out. Chun waited 10 seconds, letting the dust settle and his scope's tube reset. He flipped the switch. The green world returned. He saw one body near the extinguished flashlight. He saw 2 other shapes scrambling away to the east. He tracked the runner. Crack. The shape dropped. They tried to blind the technology, but in doing so, they revealed themselves to the soldier. It was a tactical chess match played in the dark, and Chun was winning. By the morning of April 8th, the sun rose over a battlefield that had changed. The 96th Infantry Division compiled its reports. The numbers were staggering. Impossible, even. In 7 days of combat, the division recorded 412 confirmed Japanese kills during night operations. Of those 412 kills, 127 were attributed to the M3 Carbine operators. Think about that math. There were roughly 150 cubic meter systems deployed. They represented less than 3% of the division's infantry strength. Yet, this 3% was responsible for 31% of all enemy kills at night. Even more critical was the defensive statistic. Sectors of the line covered by men like Robert Chun experienced 94% fewer American casualties from infiltration. 94%. The Buck Rogers gun wasn't a toy. It was a force field. It created a zone of denial where the enemy simply ceased to exist. Chun and his fellow operators, men like Private Eugene Wilson, Corporal James Hartley, were exhausted. Their eyes were bloodshot from staring into the green static for hours on end. Their backs were raw from the battery acid leaks. But they had done the impossible. They had taken the night back. The impact of these 150 rifles went all the way to the Japanese High Command. On April 12th, American intelligence officers captured a document from a Japanese command post. It was a directive issued to all units on Okinawa. The orders were stunned, almost defeatist. They read, "Night surface operations will be limited to final defensive positions only. Infiltration operations will be conducted only during periods of adverse weather. All units will prioritize defensive positions in caves." This was a doctrinal earthquake. For years, the Japanese army had relied on the night attack as their equalizer. It was their spirit, their station, against American material superiority. But Robert Chun and his car battery had broken that spirit. The directive effectively ended large-scale Japanese infiltration on Okinawa. They retreated into the caves. They stopped coming. The night, once their greatest ally, had become a trap. Estimates suggest that in the first week alone, the M3 operators saved between 200 and 300 American lives simply by preventing the enemy from reaching the foxholes. Chun continued to operate through May. The targets became fewer as the Japanese hid, but the threat remained. On May 23rd, near Shuri Castle, Chun engaged 3 infiltrators at 69 yards. 3 shots. 3 kills. It was his last confirmed engagement with the system. The battle for Okinawa ended on June 22, 1945. It was a bloodbath of epic proportions. 12,000 Americans died. Over 100,000 Japanese soldiers died. But amidst the carnage, the M3 Carbine had proven a point. Technology could defeat tactics. The Army planned to build 20,000 more. They were going to issue them to every platoon for the invasion of Japan. They were going to turn the night into day across the entire Japanese mainland. But the invasion never happened. The atomic bombs fell. The war ended. And then, something strange happened. The curtain of secrecy slammed back down. The M3 Carbine technology was considered too sensitive, too dangerous to be left in the wild. The Army collected the weapons. They brought them to warehouses. And in a final act of erasure, they took blowtorches to them. Thousands of scopes were cut in half. Batteries were smashed. Receivers were melted down. They didn't want the Soviets, or anyone else, to see how it worked. Robert Chun handed in his weapon. He unstrapped the battery pack that had bruised his spine for 82 days. He went home. There were no parades for the infrared operators. Their role was classified. They couldn't tell their wives or parents what they had done. They couldn't explain why they stared at the dark differently than other men. Robert Chun's name appears in no Medal of Honor citation. He gave no famous interviews. He faded into the post-war boom, a ghost in the history books. But look at the modern soldier today. Look at the panoramic night vision goggles, the thermal sights, the ability to own the dark. That lineage, that DNA, traces directly back to a muddy foxhole on Okinawa. It traces back to a 28-pound rifle and a man willing to carry it. The men of the M3 Carbine units were not heroes in the traditional sense of charging bunkers. They were the sentinels. They were the eyes that refused to close. They sat in the dark, watching green ghosts, and they held the line. They proved that while war is hell, it doesn't have to be blind. Robert Chun fought a war the enemy could not see. He won it one green shape at a time, 70 yards away, in the silence of the tropical night. And though history may have forgotten his face, every soldier who operates in the dark today walks in his shadow.